City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan, and this is Ordinary Heroes on HMTV, recorded here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Today, we're honored to welcome Wendy Tepper, a passionate member of 3G&J that empowers the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to carry forward their grandparents' stories. At a time when living survivors are fewer and fewer, Wendy and her colleagues are stepping up to make sure that these memories never fade, transforming inherited history into education, advocacy, and a call for humanity. Welcome, Wendy. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Bernie?
Very good. You've had a personal journey. What's your connection to your grandparents' story that led you to get involved with 3G&Y first, I think, and then now 3G&J?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So growing up, my grandfather, Oscar Cukierman, was a big influence in my life. We lived in the same house, and I was very lucky every day to be able to wake up and have grandpa drive me to school. All of my friends knew him, and he was a very important influence in, not only my personal life, but, my social life. He drove me to dance. He drove me to Hebrew school. Every night we would watch Jeopardy, and he knew all the answers to all the questions. He was a very brilliant man. And, growing up, I never really knew his story because, I would ask him, Grandpa, what was it like growing up? And he would just say, I don't want to talk about it. And so when I was about sixth grade, I think, I started learning about the Holocaust in school. And I came home and I asked my dad, is our family connected at all? Grandpa never wants to talk about his childhood. And my dad told me, yeah, he actually does. He was a Holocaust survivor. He survived 5 camps, and I couldn't believe it because, the grandpa who used to drive me to dance and take me to Dunkin' Donuts, was the same grandpa who survived, concentration camps. And so eventually, when I was graduating Penn State University to become a teacher, I asked my grandfather, would you sit down and tell me your story? And he eventually actually agreed. And, now through conversations with other 3Gs or, grandchildren, I'm finding that, a lot of survivors are actually opening up more to their grandchildren. I think it's because they're realizing, that time is fleeting and that, we don't all know these stories, and maybe with their own children, it was a little fresh. And so my grandfather and I sat down and I recorded his story, and I became a teacher. I told his story, although I taught elementary school, so I didn't tell it to my students, but every year, the 5th grade at my school had me come in and tell it. And for, I would say, over a decade now, I've been telling his story. And I recently left teaching, which we can talk about, the reasons why. But once I left, this opportunity fell into my lap to work for 3G&Y, and I'm really honored to be able to share his story and help other grandchildren go into schools to tell their stories as well.
Because he told his story to you, you're a witness to his story, and you share that story with others. Could you tell us a little bit about his story, if you can summarize it?
Sure, of course. So my grandfather, Oscar Cukierman, grew up in a town called Będzin, Poland, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's pretty influential in the war. And as a child, his parents, Mendel and Sirla, owned a grocery store in town. And so everyone knew them. My grandpa was one of 4 boys, and the 4 boys grew up together, playing soccer, getting into trouble. They were a normal family. Of course, until the Nazis invaded Poland. My grandfather, unfortunately, was the oldest brother. And so he was taken into the concentration camps alone without his family. His father was working at the grocery store at the time, so he was not taken. And so my grandfather was taken into 5 different concentration camps, including Buchenwald. And during his time in the camps, he, witnessed terrible things. He witnessed murder. He witnessed, beatings. And, one day he wasn't walking correctly and they decided to break his arm. So they broke his arm and they sent him to the infirmary on the concentration camp grounds. And by luck, my grandfather was laying there essentially, waiting to go to the gas chambers. And the doctor at the camp was Polish, and he actually knew my grandfather from before the war. And his mother and father were kind to him and brought him fruits and vegetables. So he saved my grandfather and hid him under a bed for about a week until his arm healed a bit, and fed him milk and rice. And the next week, my grandfather went on a cattle car to another concentration camp. And out of the 5,000 prisoners on the train, only 11 survived. And my grandfather was one of them. And the reason he survived the train ride was because of the milk and rice. So there was a lot of instances of luck during his time, and just ways he was able to survive. And after the war, he returned, to Poland to find out that his entire family was slaughtered, unfortunately, by the Nazis. So as an 18-year-old boy, essentially, he was alone. And so he found a community in Italy of people who grew up in Bendine. So he moved to Italy for 5 years, and actually during that time played professional soccer for Inter Milan, which sounds crazy, but yeah, he was a amazing soccer player. And then he found out his aunt was alive in Brooklyn. So he got on a boat and got to Brooklyn, New York. And on his first day in Brooklyn, he got off the boat, and one of his best friends from the camps who he grew up with, where they were together and he thought he died, they actually ran into each other on the street in his first day in Brooklyn. So they reunited and they kind of started a new life. So it's really a story of tragedy and sadness, but also resilience and just like hope. And anytime I tell this story to students or adults, it's pretty mind-blowing, and people say that Oscar really did change their life. So I'm honored to be able to tell the story. And I know that was a short snippet. Normally I talk for like an hour, but I think I did a good job at summarizing as best I could.
Wow, what a story of resilience, honestly. The fact that he went through all of that, it was like a string of luck that he even survived. Like my dad actually had a string of luck as well. And I find it an obligation to tell his story. And I'm sure you do too, because if it wasn't for their resilience, their bravery, right? Their valor, we wouldn't be here. God bless them. God, rest their soul. And I miss my dad very much. I'm sure you miss your grandfather. He's not around, is he?
No, he passed actually 10 years ago. So it's been a little bit of time, but he did live till 90. But yeah, I think I talk about him every single day. My kids, who are 4Gs, right? They've never met him. They talk about Grandpa Oscar all the time. They look at the clouds and they like wave to him and talk about him. And so he's very much a big presence in our life, even though he's not around. But yes, I miss him terribly.
Yes, my dad also passed away 10 years ago. And that's all I do. I talk about my dad's story because it is an incredible story. It's definitely the makings of a film, how you have tragedy, but you also have what comes out of tragedy is a story of bravery. And then they came out incredible human beings, generous and kind. You would think that somebody who goes through all of this would be bitter and not trust people, but yet my dad, and I'm sure your grandfather, were very kind and generous human beings. And teaching tolerance here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, just like yourself, you're teaching tolerance, but we're teaching it through the lens of the Holocaust. And this supports our work, doesn't it?
Yes. I always say that if we can tell their stories, like I think you mentioned in the beginning that, I'm a witness. So when we bear witness, we become a witness, right? Elie Wiesel was able to, eloquently say that quote. That's very true. And, I told a story once of my grandfather in an 8th grade class. And about a week later, I got a text from a mom in that town. And she said, I got your number through a friend. She said, I want to tell you that my 8th grader never tells me about school. She goes, but he came home and said, I have to tell you this incredible story. And he repeated the entire story about my grandfather. And she said she was so touched and he was so inspired that all he does now is talk about Grandpa Oscar. And I have so many stories like that where students will come back to me and say, we think about him all the time. He's changed our life. He's made me look at the world differently. And I think that's so powerful, right?
Absolutely. You live in New Jersey?
Yes, I live in New Jersey. I live in a town called Marlborough, New Jersey. And so it's a pretty big Jewish community here, which is nice. And I travel all over New Jersey, but I also speak virtually. I spoke in a school last year in North Dakota, and I was the first Jew they've ever met. And that was really interesting. Yeah. And I also spoke in a school in Illinois. So, at 3GNY, we speak to schools all over the world, all over the country, through virtual or in person, which is really amazing.
How many chapters are there, this 3G program? Are there several chapters across the country? You're obviously, a leader in the New Jersey chapter. And also, do you have partnerships and some kind of support from the local community?
That's a great question. Yeah. So 3GNY, so the New York chapter, is the flagship chapter. It was the chapter that was started about 20 years ago. And they've grown so big and they've done so well with training speakers. They've trained hundreds of speakers over the years to go into schools to speak. And so other chapters started to pop up, including 3G New Jersey, which is actually an affiliate of New York. So we're connected under the same 501c3. But there are chapters like 3G Miami, 3G Philly, 3G Austin, 3G Minnesota. Like it's growing. And so because it's growing so much, we actually are partnering with the USC Shoah Foundation. They created a nonprofit called Living Links, and Living Links, which is what we do, right? We're a link to history. We are a living link to the Holocaust. Living Links is now running all of the speaker trainings, and they're also helping all of the chapters grow. So it is spreading and it's really inspiring. Like, I think there's a statistic that there's about estimated 1 million 3Gs, alive. And so we're trying to reach as many as possible to say, do you want to learn about your grandparents' story? Do you want to go tell the story in schools and help people become a witness? So it's a really inspiring movement. It's also really nice. I'm sure you kind of can connect to this. When you meet other people like you in the community, it's really amazing. I mean, you can meet so many Jewish people. They're not all descendants, right, of Holocaust survivors. And so when you meet other descendants, it's such a special bond. And it's a way for you to talk about your grandparents or talk about your parents and be able to inspire each other as well.
Do you collaborate with other 3Gs from other genocides?
That's a great question. We stick to mostly the Holocaust only because, we are an educational nonprofit that goes into schools, but we will tell a school this, and I'll tell you now on the podcast, we are not experts on the Holocaust. We're experts on our grandparents, right? So, I'm not going to pretend to know. I mean, I know maybe more than the average person just because I was an educator, but we go in and tell our grandparents' story. We have worked with other organizations like Facing History on Ourselves, right? So we've worked with other organizations that, teach about other genocides or other, times of conflict. But we personally really are focusing more on our grandparents and bringing in human testimony. I think it's important to just note that when you tell a story, right, especially of a human, it makes history more real. Like, that's our goal, right, is to not just read from the textbook and hear dates and facts and battles and names of concentration camps, which of course is important. But a lot of times when students leave school or, leave that grade, what are they going to remember? Right? They'll remember the human element or the human story. And that's really the goal of 3GNY and all of the 3G chapters. You
got a degree in teaching, but you apparently moved on. Are you doing this full time?
I work for 3GNY part time. And then I'm hoping to 3G New Jersey is becoming fast, growing. And we have a lot. We did 78 speaking engagements last year to over 6,000 students. So New Jersey is definitely, growing. So we're looking into possibly creating a role for someone in New Jersey to help grow New Jersey as a coordinator. And so that's kind of the path I'm looking to go into now. But I taught elementary school for 12 years in a district in New Jersey, and they had a incident of anti-Semitism or alleged anti-Semitism in the high school. And so, speaking about my grandfather for years, I tried to help the district. I tried to reach out to the appropriate people, let me get in there. Let me talk to the students. Let me tell the story so they know why this is inappropriate. And I was kind of met with a lot of hesitancy, and there was a lot of stonewalling. And It was kind of my first instance of being a little bit shocked about how people aren't willing to talk about it, or that they aren't willing to really explore, the way Jews are being treated in the world. And so after careful consideration, I actually decided to resign because I did not feel as supported, and I felt like I could do more not being in my teaching role and being able to go to multiple schools. Myself, I spoke to over 3,600 students last year after I left teaching. And so the numbers tell themselves that I was able to then, explore and do this on a larger scale. And I don't regret that decision. I love teaching and I love being an educator, but now I'm just doing it in a different way.
Fabulous that you're doing that. You have a strong message and an important role. And I thank you for being part of this larger community, larger team to educate people and young people about tolerance and fighting back and pushing back anti-Semitism. Since October 7th, it's really taken off. And the rise in anti-Semitism is shocking. To see that happening in this country is very discouraging and disappointing, but it only encourages us actually to do more, to do better. How have you pivoted since October 7th? And did you have to pivot in a certain way?
Yeah, I think personally and educationally, we've had to pivot, right? So personally, I've talked to other descendants about this. October 7th has really deeply affected me, right? I mean, we've grown up hearing these stories from our own flesh and blood, right? And what they went through. And for years, I would say, this will never happen, right? This will never happen again. I know my grandfather went through this and it was terrible tragedy, but that many people can't turn against Jews, right? And it's just kind of like been it's never going to happen. To see how we've been attacked and how large of a scale it is, and how it's in every corner in every city, it is deeply terrifying. And I think about it on a daily basis. There are days where I am afraid, but there's other days where I push on and I go into schools and I continue. And I think it's also on a personal level made me really appreciate being a Jew and being proud and, wearing my Star of David proudly on my neck, right? And teaching my children that it's really special to be Jewish. And, educationally as a nonprofit, I mean, we've definitely have to shift a little bit as far as, our approach into going into schools. We've had schools actually reach out to us where they've had anti-Semitic incidents and say, like, how can we go about this? And so we've gone in and worked with Project Shema to train teachers on the history of anti-Semitism. We are now doing more educational work as far as training teachers on how to teach with testimony. So I think it's not just going in and talking to students, but it's also talking to educators as well, because I think a lot of educators don't feel prepped or prepared to handle this topic. And so it's really made it a much more interesting, view, and being able to just figure out how we can help on a larger scale. I think I'm sure you've probably seen that too at the center. There's so many things that need to be done. It becomes overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, we had to kind of scramble, honestly, to make the message, digestible, important, relevant to today. Our young people, are getting messages from every direction, and what's important is that they use their minds in a critical way and find out the truth. Today, it takes seconds for people to be manipulated, lied to change their thinking and be swayed in certain directions that are hate-filled, and they're not even aware of it. When they think that they're fighting for a cause, they're actually not. So they really do need to vet this information. Where do you see the future for our young people?
I think I touched on this, but the pride and learning how to be really proud to be Jewish, right? That we are a special people and that we show love and care, and our values are so deep and our family history is so deep that I think just sharing that with the world and putting out positivity is really the most important thing. I think if you look at both sides, the Israeli, parades and protests are so joyous, right? With dancing and singing and community. And I think it's important to focus on that, right? To be a united front, a united community, and to build relationships and just be proud and teach the next generation how special it is. Like I said, I talk to my kids all the time. Just a quick funny anecdote or a funny story. My son, he's 5. He came home and he said, "Mommy, I'm this girl at camp. I'm going to marry her." And I said, "Oh, you are?" And he said, "Yeah, but don't worry, Mom, she's Jewish." And it's just so funny to me that even at 5, like he picked up on that, right? So that it's like so special. And he's like, I want to marry someone Jewish because it's so special. And I just think that's an amazing thing to teach the next generation, but to be a united front and that to feel proud. And I think that's where we go. I mean, just teach and love and spread the awareness is really all we can do, because I feel frustrated sometimes. I'm sure you feel the same way, where you're like, I'm teaching all these people, I'm screaming it and shouting it at the rooftops, and there's so many people who just don't understand or just not willing to listen, right? And so we just have to keep going, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. It can be frustrating at times, but you got to keep going. I mean, that's the secret to success. You'll always hear those that are successful, never give up. Keep, persevering. And that's what you have to do, because, you'll be around for a long time doing this. And it's wonderful what you're doing. You checked all the boxes for me in terms of what I consider an extraordinary hero. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Wendy, for sharing your story and for the incredible work you're doing with 3G NJ and previously with 3GNY. Your commitment reminds me that the responsibility of remembrance doesn't end with survivors or even their children. It extends to all of us. Here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, our mission is also to ensure that these lessons of history continue to inspire action. To stand up against hate, to teach empathy, and to remind each generation that silence is never an option. So as we close, I want to thank you, Wendy Tepper, for joining me today.
Say one more thing before we go, just in case anybody listening would like to knows either a school that could use a speaker, or, my aunt is a teacher at this school. You just have to go to 3gny.org. We have a tab that says request a speaker, and we speak for free. That's the great part. The grandchildren volunteer their time to go into schools, and this is all free. And it's a great way to enhance history. So I just wanted to give that out there, because I know somebody might be listening and say, oh, this would be great for my school. So thank you, Bernie.
Especially in New Jersey, right? That's where you're based out of. Visit HMTC, connect with organizations like 3GNY and 3GNJ, as Wendy mentioned, and be part of carrying the memory into the future, because together we can make sure that the courage of survivors and the voices of the next generation continue to light the way forward. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan of Ordinary Heroes on HMTV. Until next time.